eating disorder is when a person has overvalued ideas about weight, shape, and appearance. Eating disorders usually begin pre-adolescence or just at the onset of adolescence, and it usually begins with dieting. So dieting is usually the trigger for the eating disorder. That can lead to some very common eating disorders because dieting in itself and the restrictive nature of it then can lead to common things like binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, and anorexia nervosa. Those are the common eating disorders. Eating disorders are more common in girls than in boys, in women than in men. So girls are 10 times more likely to experience an eating disorder than boys. I think some of the reasons why eating disorders are more common in girls than in boys are firstly because of our cultural ideals around weight, shape and appearance tends to target girls more than boys. The second reason I think is because girls tend to internalize their problems, whereas boys tend to externalize their problems. So girls tend to blame themselves, essentially. And so if girls have some kind of difficulties, they're likely to turn their difficulties against themselves. And what better way to do that than to control their food intake? So eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric disorders. Eating disorders are also notoriously difficult to treat. So approximately 1/3 of those with eating disorders will die, and those are usually as a result of complications, physical complications of the eating disorder, as well as suicide. Approximately another 1/3 of those with eating disorders will relapse for the rest of their lives, and only about 1/3 of those with eating disorders will make a full recovery. And even then, of those people, they may continue to experience the eating disordered type thinking over the course of their lives. It's really difficult to know whether eating disorders are on the rise or whether there are more reports of eating disorders. Eating disorders might seem to be on the rise, and possibly they are. They may also seem to be more common than they actually are. So for a severe eating disorder, only about 1 in 1,000 in the population will experience anorexia nervosa, but 1 in 100 might experience bulimia nervosa. Eating disorders have been around for centuries, actually, and historically eating disorders began in a religious context with what were called these miracle maidens that were considered very pure because they were able to live on air. So eating disorders have a really long history, and it's quite interesting that it comes from that sort of history because one of the core values that those with eating disorders hold is one of asceticism. So of being very sparse, harsh, perfectionistic, and pure, whatever that means to the person with eating disorders. So the best way to treat eating disorders is prevention. And we know that there are some core things that can trigger a young person into an eating disorder. Those things are being teased for weight and appearance. that teasing can happen at home just by a sibling poking fun at their sister's body weight or chubby cheeks or whatever that might be, or at school. Sometimes parents can also unintentionally spark some shame around food, eating, weight and appearance by making commentary on how that young person is eating, what they're eating, how much they're eating, as well as their appearance. So it's really one of the most important preventative things is to put less emphasis on weight, shape and appearance, and more emphasis on other aspects of that young person. The other thing that's really important is to look out for any signs of dieting, because dieting is the number one trigger for tipping a young person that might have a predisposition to it into a full-blown eating disorder. The difference between healthy eating patterns versus unhealthy eating patterns that might lead to an eating disorder is the underlying psychology and emotional experience that a person experiences. So for a person with healthy eating patterns, they are not motivated by things like ascetic values, by an overvalued idea on what that eating pattern is going to help them achieve in life. So a person with an eating disorder, an unhealthy relationship with food and eating, will have overvalued ideas on what weight and shape is going to provide them in life. So if I'm really thin, everything in my life will be perfect. The thing that's very interesting that I started to see recently clinically that's interesting to do with healthy eating is the evolving new diagnostic category now that's developing. It's called orthorexia, and this is where people have overvalued ideas on healthy eating. So these people, they become completely fixated and obsessed with clean eating. It affects other aspects of their lives. It ends up just taking over all of their thinking, and their emotional resources and energy all goes towards fixating on only being able to eat healthy foods, which might not seem like a bad thing, but it's really distressing for the person having it. It means they can't just have normal social life and have the flexibility to be able to incorporate and enjoy other sorts of food. So if it's got a tiny bit of sugar in it or a tiny bit of gluten in it, that they're able to flexibly incorporate that. Instead, people with orthorexia, they get anxious in the presence of any ingredient that they consider to be unhealthy. Young girls and women are particular targets of issues around food, eating, weight, shape and appearance. They are particularly targeted. And as a result, I would say the great majority of young girls and women might not have an eating disorder, but are greatly affected by these cultural messages around food and eating and weight and appearance. So I think that the latest statistic was something like 8 in 10 girls aged between 10 and 11 have tried various forms of dieting. So that's pretty shocking. So the advice that I would give to anyone raising girls, or if you're a woman that has really struggled with accepting your weight or shape or appearance, is to start, I guess, encouraging you to think about other aspects of yourself and your life, and it's a very hard sort of piece of work, but to go against the cultural influence and begin to find ways in which you can accept yourself for the person you are.